Good evening and welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm your host, Joshua Solomon, and with me is JP Marzullo. Hi, JP.
How are you doing?
Good. You back from your secret mission?
I am, okay. But I picked up a habit of yours.
Uh-oh.
I just want to let you know. You know how you're always doing this on the table?
Uh-oh.
Somehow I picked that up. Somebody called me out on it and says, well, Josh isn't there, so you're picking that up. So I don't know what you're wiping off because there's nothing on the table. But
I'm just doing stuff with my hands. I'm not a showman. I'm just the average guy who doesn't know what to do in front of a camera.
Okay, yeah.
Even though I've been doing this for, 5 years?
Exactly, exactly.
All right. The Honorable JP Marzullo. I keep forgetting the title. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Could be King or something.
All right, next time it's King. Next week I'm introducing you as King Marzullo. As always, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades is sponsored by the Wilson Hill Pistol Club, the oldest sports shooting club in the state of New Hampshire, 1732 Lakeshore Road, right here in Manchester, New Hampshire. Open enrollment. We do not have a waiting list, unlike other sports shooting clubs in this state. You can get training, again, access to the range. And
you can try pistols out, right?
We're going to have a try-a-gun, I think it's this month in May. I'll have to check the calendar. WilsonHillPistol.org, and the first Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. directly after this show at 1732 Lakeshore Road is an open membership meeting. So anyone's welcome to go there. So, all right, hadn't done that in a little while. There's nothing, at least that's visible to me on the training calendar at the moment. Summer is usually a kind of our slow time. We let everybody skip the meetings during the summer, and we come back in August, September, just like school.
Just like school, right?
All right. JP, why don't you introduce our guest and make sure you get the right counsel.
Yeah, I will. So tonight we're proud to have John Stephen with us, and he's not running for execution counselor. He's running for executive counsel. Hi, John.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, we had a little typo in the show description earlier.
Yeah, a little.
New Hampshire does not have an execution council yet.
Yet, we're working on it. So, John, why don't you kind of tell the viewers a little bit about what you've been doing, since you ran the last time, kind of bring them up to speed, if you will, and then we'll touch on some subjects that they might be interested in.
Sure, and to lead up to that, I want to thank you both for the opportunity to talk to some of the voters in the District 4, and I want to give Ted Gatzis, Councilor Gatzis, credit for just the great job and commend him for the public service that he gave to our state.
Yep.
And I was Commissioner of Health and Human Services. Teddy and I worked together. He was in the State Senate, and he was on finance and always asked tough questions, kept the department heads very much on their toes, making sure that they have the right data and the right information to protect the taxpayers. And I saw that on the council, and I saw that as he was the mayor of our great city in Manchester. And I'm a lifelong resident of this great city. And when I worked with Teddy, that's why I want to say that New Hampshire is privileged to have people that dedicate their service in their careers to the public. And he's one of them. And I want to just first thank him for his service. And because when I found out that Teddy Gatzis wasn't running again for re-election, I felt strongly that I wanted to consider that. I talked to my wife and my family, and that's why I'm running to make sure that we continue the very much what the council involves: scrutiny of contracts, nominations, making sure that the taxpayers receive value at all times, and making sure that the New Hampshire Vantage stays firm and in place. And again, lifelong resident of Manchester.
Yep.
So I grew up in the restaurant business. My dad owned the Vault restaurant down the road. Yep. And so I think it's important, just real quick, to tell you that when my dad was in the restaurant, I was peeling potatoes and washing dishes.
Child labor.
Yep. But family business, and my dad, they raised the rooms and meals tax. And he got really upset because he's a small business owner in this city, and he was the one that was fighting to bring business downtown. He stayed downtown. He cared about downtown. This was back in the 80s, and actually towards 1979, 80. And he said, "Come on, son, I'm running for state senate." And I got the chance to go door to door with my dad, meet the people, and I never forgot that. And he really wanted to make sure that the small business owners of this state were protected and had someone that could, have their voice.
Yeah.
So that's where it all started, really, and I felt strongly about that. My dad won the state Senate seat in Manchester.
Wow.
He ran against someone that was a state senator for 30 years, never lost an election.
Wow.
My dad won on his first election.
Nice.
And he was there for 10 years, still ran the business, and I got to see the bipartisanship. I got to see people working together, both parties, trying to make sure they do the best they can for the taxpayers of the state and businesses and families. And so, again, I have to say that because my passion for public service started when I was young and working in the restaurant with my dad.
So
anyways.
John, a lot of people don't know what the Executive Council does.
That
You
was
touched
exactly
on,
what I was going to.
That's a great question. So here's what's really important. The Executive Council, we are so privileged in New Hampshire. In my business, I go out to other states and help other states and governors in terms of reaching efficiency and finding savings and working hard for them. And I will tell you, New Hampshire is privileged to have our founding fathers design this Constitution in New Hampshire to have a check and balance on the governor's power. Right. New Hampshire has a limited governor power, basically. Yep. And it's because the council has to confirm all appointments. The council has to also approve all contracts above a certain value, and in by the statute, it's $10,000 or more. So even department heads are held accountable. And the council is made up of 5 individuals in the state that come from different districts and are able to make decisions based upon what's in the best interest of their constituents. And this is all about good government. Because when government is closest to the people, it's the best form of government.
Exactly.
So, again, there's no other government like this around the country.
I think we're the only ones.
Right. Are we the only ones?
I believe so.
Because most other states have a lieutenant governor.
Which they vote on.
But we don't.
Right.
We have an executive council,
which
represent
that
5 districts in the state.
Yeah.
Again, closest to the people, and really making sure there's a check and balance on the governor's authority and power. And to me, that's just, not only is it an incredible thing that the founding fathers did in putting that into our Constitution of New Hampshire, it also is representative of the type of New Hampshire government we have, like the value. We talk about New Hampshire Advantage. Why? Because we have 400 members in the House.
Right.
We have 24 senators, but we have 400
Well, it goes back to what you said. We have a government that's close to the people, and it's unique in that way that we have this executive council. We have the largest legislature in this country, and that's also why we're first in the nation, right? What's the saying in New Hampshire? I'm not going to vote for you unless I meet you 3 times, or something
exactly.
like that.
Right.
Right. I mean,
and that's kind of true.
That's why
actually.
they do so much campaigning in this state, is because we are that focused. We are that involved.
And another one of the reasons I'm running is I served as an assistant attorney general. I was at the Department of Safety deputy commissioner, and I was commissioner of the largest state agency for 4 years. And I kept that state budget flat. Medicaid spending was flat. I returned $143 million to the taxpayers that I didn't need for programs and spending that they gave me in the legislature that I said we don't need. We can return to the taxpayers.
Nice.
Not many department heads do that. And so what I'm bringing is a perspective of accountability to know that these department heads work for the people as well. And I want to make sure that in that check and balance system, that they're making the right decisions for the people of this state. And I'm concerned that we've received a lot of federal CARES Act dollars in the past few years. Our budget has increased. The governor's done a really good job in terms of making sure that services, the Doorway Project, the substance abuse issues, everything. But we are coming to a point where the federal dollars are going away at that level. And we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And in order to make sure we don't have an income tax, we don't have more encroachment of government on the people of this state, we need that check and balance. And that's why it's so important. The council is as important a form of our government as any other. They all work together.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that we have, not just check and balances, but our governor it's the weakest governor position in the country, really. And not in the respect that it's the check and balances. That's really what they're talking about. So you were talking briefly about your business, what you did. and I know you've been to other states, and why don't you explain to people why that process will help you run and will help them help us once you're elected.
Absolutely, JP. So I'll give a few examples of what we do. When I left state government, I saw so many areas as a commissioner of inefficiency. I saw so many areas of waste. I saw areas where we didn't need to spend these dollars in certain areas. And I wanted to take all that knowledge I gained and be able to go and help states be able to return value to their own taxpayers as well. And I was fortunate to have, Governor Sununu's father, John Sununu, right. Introduced me right away to a couple governors. And I started a business where I could go in and compete in states to actually go in and look at their programs and identify areas of efficiency and waste so that I could help them save money for their taxpayers. So what I was doing in New Hampshire, I brought to other states in the last 12 years now. We have a company in Manchester where I hire folks that really are good fiscal conservatives that can look at areas of budget. And I'll give you an example. In Oklahoma, we identified for the state that there was close to $2 million a year that they were giving to health plans for prisoners in Oklahoma that were showing up at prison, going to prison. And when you go to, by federal law, when you go to prison, you can no longer, Medicaid can no longer pay for that. That all your health care is paid for out of the general fund, where you have a contract with a hospital or federal qualified centers. But
yet this Medicare money was going.
But the state was paying the health plans.
Okay.
Every month, the health plans get paid every month a fee to take care of the population that's on that plan. But what happened was the state didn't know, because the computer systems were not connecting. There were two different departments. One was Medicaid, one was the Department of Corrections, and they didn't communicate, which is very consistent in state governments. And so one didn't know what the other was doing. Well, we were able to identify that, close that gap, and from this point forward, there's not going to be $2 million leaking in Oklahoma anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what's credit to our team. And we do a good job. We identify savings, we get in and we get out.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important.
No, that's one of the things we actually discussed on last week's show with a member of the Judiciary Committee was, and we've talked with other members of the Judiciary Committee, including the chairman, about the fact that there are agencies in this state that aren't communicating with each other. In particular, law enforcement, right? There isn't a law enforcement system. So someone can be committing a crime over here in Manchester, get bailed under the new catch and release plan, and commit exactly the same crime an hour later or a couple hours later in Dover or Rochester, and the two cities aren't communicating with each other. And so that's a big thing with me, and that's just a law enforcement example. You're talking about the medical example, but with the corrections department, different. Right? The idea that these state agencies that are spending my money, they need to be communicating with each other.
I have another example. We looked at a state where we're looking at all different departments: corrections, safety, health and human services. Every one of them has their own mailroom. Every one of them buys stamps on different contracts. Every one of them have their own IT departments, when they could be leveraging their buying power and reduce dollars that they have to spend and save money for the taxpayers. We can do that in New Hampshire too. And as a counselor, I will make sure that department heads are held accountable so that the taxpayers receive value in every decision I make. And that's why I want to be there and represent the people of this great district, and hope that we can continue to return value.
What's the district you're?
What are the
what are the
It's
areas?
District 4. Most of the towns in the district, or the cities, the greater Manchester area and outside of Manchester, even into Lee and Loudon and Barnstead. It's a district that is made up of a number of smaller towns outside of
is
Manchester.
Goffstown in that now?
Goffstown is in the district as well. And District 4 has evolved through redistricting.
Right.
And we're going to be out in every town, and we're going to be meeting the voters, and we're going to be hearing and listening to what their concerns are. And Executive Council, again, is a very important form of government. And some of them may not know, like the first question, what does an Executive Councilor do? I want to make sure that they understand the importance of this position first.
Yeah.
So tell us what you've done up until this point. Well, you've done a little bit of that.
No, I think I'll step back and say I started small business with my parents, but then I went to the University of New Hampshire, Trinity High School here in Manchester, went to the University of New Hampshire, graduated with a business degree, went to law school in Michigan, and came back and worked in Hillsborough County as a county attorney assistant.
Okay.
And so for 4 years, I was prosecuting felony crimes here in the county, and represented in many of the towns. Ware, Goffstown. I was given a lot of the towns, and I was working with the county attorneys when we had the street sweeper, and we really looked at making sure that people got treatment, but there was also consequences, and it's important. And then when I went out to the Attorney General's office, I was prosecuting homicide cases, but I was also arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court, writing briefs. The law was real important for me that Constitution was followed, but really making sure that public safety was at the heart of what I did. And then I became the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Safety, which oversees motor vehicles, state police, also fire standards and training, Marine Patrol. So, and I helped draft the driver privacy law, because I care deeply about privacy rights for our citizens. And I helped write that law. Today we have a very strict driver privacy law.
So tell us about that. Tell us what is driver privacy? Is that like
in the
not being searched when I can get pulled over for speeding, or an expired registration or inspection?
In the early, right around in the 1990s, that became a big issue, because folks could actually look at a license plate and call someone and find out from either law enforcement someone that worked in the department, and they could actually look up someone's information.
Oh, so you could get
yes, and I'm not suggesting that law enforcement in New Hampshire was doing that. No, on the contrary, they weren't. But there weren't enough penalties. There weren't strict application of the law. That was one thing. Secondly, we needed to make sure that there was security built into the systems, so that the law put the standards of security so that nobody could access anyone's driver information, whether it be name, date of birth, ID, from that database without a legitimate law enforcement purpose that had to be documented in the system. I helped draft that law that finally passed. And privacy issues are very important to me, and it's important in New Hampshire. Subsequently, through the great work of a few of the state senators that I know and care deeply about, they drafted a constitutional amendment that passed a few years ago on the right to privacy. New Hampshire today is one of the only states that has a constitutional right to privacy. Every citizen has that right. So there's not just a federal privacy issue, there's not just a statute issue. We have a constitutional right to privacy here. So you have a very strong privacy culture in New Hampshire, and I want to honor that, and I want to make sure that the department heads are honoring that as well.
Was that Neil Kirk's?
We worked closely with Neil. Neil and I worked closely on that driver privacy law.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember there was. I may not have the story straight, but the gist of it is, Ware was in the process of becoming an SB2 town.
Yes.
When they were, because previously they weren't, and there was a lot of issues with Ware's police chief at the time, and the police chief himself came out to one of these meetings and held up a binder and said, "You would not believe the backgrounds of some of these people that are advocating SB2." and it was right after that privacy law got put into place, and everybody said, wait a minute, you can't just for your own particular reasons go and pull all those files and then use it in a town meeting. That was just an egregious thing that was done, and that police chief ended up getting booted soon thereafter. We had a few problems in Ware related to that. But that's what that reminds me of is he just decided on his own unilaterally that he was just going to pull the backgrounds of a number of citizens because he didn't like what they were advocating in a town meeting, and that was just way out of line.
So John,
it's good to know that that's against the law completely.
Yeah. But remember, I'm going to bring this back to the council. It's really important that you understand, and the folks that we go out and talk to, I'm going to try to make sure they understand the importance of that position. You are reviewing and approving every contract in state government that is more than $10,000.
Right.
That just doesn't happen. And when I tell people that across the country that I work in these other states,
that's a very low bar considering today's money.
And you know, when I was commissioner, I was probably one of the only ones that would read all those contracts, because if I'm sending one to the council, I'm going to make sure that it has everything in there that I'm okay with, that I can answer every question.
Yeah, because the counselors are going to quiz you, and you're going to read it, hopefully.
And I was quizzed often, but you need to be on your toes, and that's great for department heads too. So again, I want to hold department heads accountable. I want to make sure the taxpayers get value, and I also want to make sure that judicial appointments are appropriate. That if there's a nomination, the person who's being nominated is someone that represents New Hampshire values as well. So nominations are important.
That includes judges.
Again, department heads,
right,
and also commission members. And so really knowing backgrounds, making sure that you ask the right questions. That's what I respected a lot about. You know, today I got the endorsement of Councilor David Wheeler, and also Joe Kenny, two great New Hampshire citizens that we share very much similar ideologies and thoughts and approaches, and I was honored to get their endorsement. But when you look at what the questions that are asked, that we have a great council, and with Councilor Gatsis leaving, that's going to be a void. And he would ask those tough questions.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons I want to be there, to ask the tough questions, to make sure, again, we continue to get back to the value and move this New Hampshire advantage even further down the road.
Yeah.
So what's the current makeup of the executive council as far as
4-1?
It's 4-1 at the
Republicans.
moment.
Republican, Democrat, correct.
4-1. And are there Democrats in the race that you're in right now for District 4 at the moment?
There are Democrats that are thinking of running. There's one that's announced, I believe, from Manchester, but I'm not aware of how many there are.
So what's the process with executive council? I mean, obviously, your names will show up on the ballot, but are there going to be, say, debates? Meet the candidates.
I mean, there'll be.
Are there anything?
We're going to be
anything like that.
I know.
Or is this technically one of those non-partisan things, or because a lot of the towns have non-partisan elections? Is this a non-partisan?
This is a partisan election.
Okay, so would there
very
be
important
debates or anything like that?
I'm not aware of.
No, they haven't typically in the past had debates.
I'm not aware of that.
I'm just curious.
No, but that's not a bad idea.
No, but at the end of the day, you have the president, then you've got your governor's race, and then you've got the governor council on the ticket, and then you'll have your House races and the state Senate races. So I mean, it's a very important year, and the primary will have both the Republican and Democratic side, and the ballot will include those offices. And yes, the executive council will have myself on the Republican side, and there'll be others named. But again, I'm asking voters tonight, people watching this show, to vote for John Stephen for executive council. I would appreciate your consideration and vote. We're going to be on that ballot, and I'm proud to represent the voters. I'm proud of this state, and we're going to do everything we can to win and work as hard as you've seen. And you know, JP, from the last time I was out there, we knock on doors,
Absolutely.
We listen to people, we work hard. And I just love that about New Hampshire. Again, it goes back to my dad when I was a young boy, and I just saw my father. He had to knock on every door because it didn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. He just wanted to listen, and he wanted to help someone, and that's just the way he was. You don't look at an RD or an I. What is the issue we can help you with? Your government should work for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, this is probably going to. You were with the HHS, right? And so, what's been going on in the news lately about what's happened, to DCYF and things like that? I don't believe you were there when this stuff was happening, but to be clear, so that in case a competitor brings that up and talks about it in the wrong way, why don't you kind of let the people know exactly where you were, what you were doing, and whether you were involved in that, and maybe what you would have done differently.
I mean, we look at juvenile justice is always a program that I care deeply about, making sure that these kids get treatment, get on the right path. We had great directors, Bill Fenneman and Rod Forey. Bill Fenneman was the chief in Dover, chief of police. Rod Forey was former state trooper, and they ran a really good place and operation. And we focused on clinical treatment services to make sure when they get out, they're out and they get the right path.
Right.
And that was important. And to me, when we were there after the incidents, but at the end of the day, the issue is to make sure that any youth at a detention facility, a congregate care facility, that it is as limited in time as possible. You obviously want to protect public safety, but you want to make sure they receive the type of services they need, because they're going to go back into society, most of them. Yeah. There are some that you might charge. When I was at the prosecutor's office, we charged some with an adult, acting as an adult, charged as an adult. It's a different story, different situation.
Yeah.
But a lot of these kids, JP, the question is, go back and you look at some of these foster care youth too. These kids have come up in circumstances where they don't have mentors. They need encouragement. They need to just find that one person or persons that can move them into that, to that independence and self-sufficient phase that we all enjoy. And it can happen. I never ever said no. I've never ever give up and say we can never fix this person, make them, or create a situation where there's an environment that they can succeed. But if they end up not succeeding, then there are things that will happen later on in life, and that's why you see a corrections issue. But a lot of the times you see a lot of the folks, the data shows you, it's because we didn't spend enough time trying to connect them in the community to different mentors and individuals that can make a difference. And I'll give you a quick example. 3 years ago, I helped with a couple other folks, Mike Salter and a few business folks, create what's called All Youth Count in New Hampshire. We put together a private sector body with an idea that I created to take foster care youth when they were 14 to 17, 18. And if you hit that 14 bar and you're not adopted and you're in the foster care system, and there's no fault of your own, you're removed from your home because something with your parents or parental issues, if you're not adopted by the age of 14 in New Hampshire, the percentage of being adopted is so low, you'll probably never be adopted. You think about that, to have a permanent home. Yeah, they're bouncing back and forth in foster homes, but they're going to be 17, 18, and they're going to go into the adult system, into the community. So we started a nonprofit through Easter Seals called All Youth Count. And we focus on private sector coming together to develop connections for those youth. So when they're 14, 15 and they want to, we call our friends who are plumbers. We call our friends that are in the HVAC industry.
Right.
In the industry, and we'll say, will you take this youth out on a job for a week? Let him see what it's like, and encourage him to see something that he probably will not see without this type of mentorship type connection. And so, to me, a lot of youth in this state will benefit through real enhanced connections through mentorship programs. So I believe in that.
So we had one of the people from Best Buddies on. It sounds similar to what you've got going, but I think yours might be a little different.
The difference between ours, JP, is we also raise funds, flex funds from the community. So that, and I'll give you an example. There was a woman who was living in a garage, had an infant in our program, had an infant, and she was pregnant, living in a garage in the foster care system, not having a home, but she gets a voucher from DCYF. She gets a voucher to live in an apartment.
Okay.
She's no longer in the system. She had aged out. When you're 18, statutorily, you do not have to stay in the system. You can stay up to age 21. Well, what we did was she couldn't find a place, an apartment, but had a voucher. We found a landlord. We call our private group, found a landlord. In fact, I found a landlord. We had the Easter Seals group brought that landlord into the picture. We ended up finding a home. And the landlord's concern with foster care youth that have vouchers is what happens if there's damage in the property? What happens if there's an issue? Who's going to pay for that? Yeah, the voucher may cover a certain amount, but this is where we come in. We assure the landlord, the private sector group, through flexible funds we've raised through the community, we will pay for any damage. Wow. We will be the insurance to help this youth succeed. And in fact, that family, that woman, we got her into community college.
Wow.
We started to get her on the road, the right path, from a garage.
Wow.
And the reason I'm saying that is that's the private sector that did that. I got this group together of folks from banks, colleges, communities, businesses that all said, roll up our sleeves, we want to help the foster care youth in New Hampshire.
That's awesome.
And no government spending, and we went and started to reach out to our friends. Steve Singer, the Singer family, one youth needed a vehicle to get to work. And we went to the Singer family. We said, would you give us a discount on a used vehicle for this young gentleman to work? We got a great deal. We paid, I think it was $6,000 for a car that probably the Singer family could have got $10,000 to $12,000 for.
Yep.
But we were able to get a discount. That individual was able to go to work and get a car. Again, private sector working with the community.
I've always said that the private sector does everything better than the government does, right? I mean, it's important that we encourage that, get the government out of our lives, and enact policies that allow the private sector to do things like that. Because you hit on it earlier, when the government starts imposing these new fees, new taxes, et cetera, it squeezes the private company, the private organizations, so that they don't have the facilities to do these great things in the community.
And I truly believe that the government sometimes is the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Just step aside, let the private sector do what it does best. Again, this is important because regulation is what undermines small business, undermines our ability to succeed and move forward and create jobs. You want to make sure that you have reasonable regulation that ends up, not impacting businesses' ability to grow. And so having a state that is low taxes, less regulation is always the best.
So are there any unique policies that you could see that need to be changed maybe with the executive council, or should be looked at, or do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, are they,
again,
I know they don't make pass laws or things, but
it's not a law-making body.
Right.
Again, reviewing contracts, reviewing spending, reviewing nominations. I think that what's really important is when I talk about accountability, it's making sure that you're asking the right questions, identifying the right issues at the right time to make sure value is given to every citizen of the state. So a decision that's made, you need to make sure you return value.
Right.
And so there's a lot to that. So every contract needs to be scrutinized. This is very important. And so when you talk about policy, the policy is already made and set.
Right.
The contract is now implementing the policy that the legislature set through the budget,
right,
and that the departments are working on. But I'm going to be a counselor that's going to ask the questions. For example, is this a program that is required by law? Is this a program that's required by rule? Or is this a program that you just have on a wish list that you may want to do because it sounds good?
Yep.
And if they don't pass the test, we're going to have a problem with that contract. And I'm going to say no.
So when folks come to the executive council with an expenditure like that, do they come with contracts in hand? Do they come with budgets that are already set in stone and the executive council says yes or no? Or can the executive council say, go back and bring me back a spending plan that's $100,000 less than that? Like, do you?
It's a great question.
How do you?
What
what is the executive council's role in telling somebody no? Do you just say no flat out, or
First
do
of all, there's 5.
Do they resubmit?
There's 5 on the council, so you need 3 votes to have really the action that, either says no or go back to your drawing board. Come back when you're better prepared. Come back when you answer the questions. If you don't have 3 votes on that council, then you're not going to be successful. So you also have to be able to work with across the table. But if you raise the questions, like again, Councilor Gatsis and Councilor Wheeler and Councilor Kenny do a great job. They ask those right tough questions. And so there are times where there'll be so many questions the governor will say to the department heads, go back, come back with in another day and another meeting. There's usually 2 meetings a month when all these questions are answered. Or outside of this hearing, let's set up another hearing to answer those questions. So I mean, it is really important because now when that contract is through the council, it has been vetted and those questions have been answered.
Yeah, the reason why I brought up the policy thing was because most people had thought at one time that the executive counselors set policy. They don't. I was there a couple of times through some of the sessions where there was only one contract brought to the council without any competition. And I can remember what happened. They said, wait a minute, you can't just give me one. Let's look at, there's got to be other people who are going to bid on this. And I mean, that's crucial that that's done properly and that they're vetted. And 90% of the time, maybe even higher than that, they're vetted. But I've watched Councilman, Wheeler in particular, and Kenny, and I've seen them bring up points that really shocked the people that are there. But they were good questions, and they didn't look at it. The person that was presenting it, and some of these people work for the state, right, with contracts like that. But one in particular had to do with children, and they hadn't done their job.
We have a process that, first of all, always favor competition. Always. Competition brings the best out of everyone,
yep.
Including business in the state. And so there are also times where a contract might come to the table that is what we call sole source. There's
Right.
been no competition. That's frowned upon. And in our state,
But sometimes it does happen.
but there's a statute that allows it.
There has to be situations where there really is one organization that knows how to do this. I mean, all of us in the business world have seen that there's really only one go-to.
There
sometimes
is one organization sometimes, but then that case has to be made.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. If the case is not made, then go back to the drawing board and make sure you do it the right way. That's holding department heads accountable. And if it's an emergency service, though, and the folks should be assured that there are statutory requirements, and they allow for emergency procurement. There's a method, there's a process in place.
Yeah.
You follow the process and make sure that, again, the questions are answered, accountability is met, and then this contract can go forward. But without that, there's no reason to just say yes. You need to make sure you follow. I think the taxpayers of the state would want you to follow that process. And honest, transparent, and when I say competition should be absolutely the preferred method. And honest and transparent evaluation. So that's another thing you look at in a contract. Was there an honest, fair, and transparent evaluation? Who were the evaluators? were there any conflicts? Did they make the appropriate decision based upon the facts at hand, not anything that was outside of the actual RFP process? That is a very important question that needs to be addressed in all these contracts. But if you see that in the document you review, it'll save from asking a lot of the questions. But this is why that position is a very important position for this state, to make sure that our precious taxpayer dollars are used wisely. And that's how, as commissioner, I was always that way. You know, I used to tell my staff, you remember when Craig Benson was governor?
Yep.
When I was commissioner of HHS, I was there for 4 years, 2003 to 2007. And during that 4-year period, we kept Medicaid spending pretty much straight line. No other commissioner in the United States had done that. And each year, we returned whatever we didn't need back to the taxpayers. At the end of 4 years, $143 million returned basically to the rainy day fund, unused. I don't know if department heads do that today, because I don't hear a lot about that.
Yeah, it's rare that you hear anything like that. You know, the general consensus is spend the money or you won't get it again next year, right? And a lot of organizations and a lot of department heads will do exactly that. They will spend everything that they got, no matter how it got to them, so that they get at least that much the next time through, right?
And also,
that's always been the attitude. That's the attitude that it's always permeated.
But recently, I have seen the Biden administration with federal grants, policies that have encroached upon the freedoms of the people of this state. And they do that through contracts, because if they give you money, nothing's free.
Right.
If they give you federal dollars and they require certain conditions.
We've talked about that before too.
And that's happening.
It comes with a hook in it. Federal money comes with a hook, and I want an executive council that's willing to say no.
And I will be that type of counselor, because I'm going to tell you again, there has to be scrutiny. Nothing is for free. And when you start seeing this contract and it says all federal funds, as soon as I see that, immediately my antenna goes up. Okay, what is going to be the backfill plan when those federal funds go away?
Yeah, exactly.
We have to ask that question.
Yep.
Well, that's the other side of it, right? Okay, the funds at some point will go away, right? Like you said. So then we're going to have to fill that void, because we've spun up an entire division, an entire department around spending that money, around doing what those federal dollars are supposed to do. People get paid, people have to distribute the money, people have to be responsible and accountable for that money. And all of those people, when that federal money goes and that entire organization, do we drop the program completely? Do all those people lose their jobs? Do all the beneficiaries lose their benefits? Right? So you're absolutely right there. But I always thought about the first half. When federal money comes in, here, you can have this $20 million as long as you do this, and this, which the Biden administration would like your organization, your state to do. You can have this $20 million as long as you house this many illegal aliens here. And I don't like those hooks. I'd rather say, I don't want it. I don't want the money at all, because I don't want the headache that comes with it, and it's politically motivated with these rules.
And you're 110% accurate and correct. At the end of the day, again, it's not just the jobs that are lost. There's going to be tough questions and tough decisions at some point. So the reason that I'm running is because I want to make sure that we continue to be as fiscally responsible and sound in our decisions to maintain the New Hampshire advantage for my 2 daughters, Nicole and Hannah, for their friends, for our entire state, for our future generations. And we can do it. And we can go without an income tax for hundreds of years. Okay? We don't need an income tax in this state. But if you continue to spend, and not have a type of fiscal accountability and control, at some point, the small businesses of this state are going to be asked, questions, and they're going to be impacted, and then communities are going to be impacted, and it's all going to be impactful in the long run. So How can we prevent that from happening? Let's look at opening up the rainy day fund to be ready for that type of event in the legislature. So those policies you talk about, JP, are really made to make sure we have a good, stable state.
Exactly.
And the governor and the policymakers have done a really good job. And the federal funds are now coming to an end with the CARES Act.
Yep.
And we need to begin to be thinking about making tough decisions. And I want to be the counselor that's there to make the tough decisions for the people of the state and the district.
So, concerning policy and spending, so we have a alumni of the legislature over here. The legislature passes a new law. The new law is a new program that does X, Y, and Z. This program requires money, right? So it's got to go through finance because we've got to fund this new program that. So let's say we had a legislature that's just out of control with spending. They create a new law. It requires this out of control spending, and this out of control spending requires several contracts that then need to go. Okay, so it's gotten through the legislature. The governor has signed it, right? So let's say we've just got just a bunch of irresponsible folks, but then all the contracts that are a result of this legislated policy, this legislated disaster, any contracts that have to come out of it come through the executive council.
Right. Yep.
What power does the executive council have to say no to something that is now legally mandated because of an out of control legislator and governor?
I mean, the council cannot change state law.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. So what happens if the council gets a contract that is just a disaster?
So
but it's legally mandated.
But
what happens?
Again, the council's responsibility is to make sure that department heads are accountable, that contract that comes to your desk is following law, but it's also the best value for the state of New Hampshire. And when I say that,
so a little bit of hand tying.
But when I say that, and I've been in this situation where I'm bringing a contract to some law that passed that I don't even like.
Right.
It's not what I asked for.
Right.
But I'm going to make sure that that contract meets all of those provisions that I mentioned earlier. You know, returning value as much as possible to the taxpayer, making sure it doesn't encroach in terms of add more layers of government to the extent possible, making sure that not only did we get a competitive bid, did we get the best price for the state? So more questions can be asked here to make sure that, again, that value goes to the taxpayer. For example, I remember when I was commissioner, and I had a contract in front of me that was required by one of the universities. Activity was required. The university, one of the colleges in our state, won the contract. When I looked at the contract, it was for a few $1 million. I saw indirect in the contract, indirect line item that had 30% indirects.
Red flag.
It's a college. I went to my staff. Why is this 30%? Every other contract we have with community organizations, their indirects are 10%. Why are we giving? Well, they're a university, Commissioner. They're a college. We always give colleges 30%. No, you're not going to do that under my watch. You will not do that under my watch. We are going to treat them just like we treat every other organization. So guess what? We went to the council. I reduced it to 10%. The universities were upset, the university, and went to the council. And I was the commissioner. I explained my reasoning to the council, and they agreed with me. And we saved a few $1 million.
That's just insane that you've got this class of organizations, universities, liberal universities, who expect this special treatment of millions of dollars in discretionary funding that they can do whatever they want with. That is just absurd to me. And if we expand that to the national level, to the federal level, I cannot fathom. I don't think anyone in this room can fathom the amount of waste that is taking place nowadays.
That's why I felt compelled. I really wanted to make sure that we have someone representing people in District 4 that can also make sure that when you're sitting at home, and that unfathomable decision is made by a department head, you can rest assured that you have a counselor that's going to sit there and represent your interests.
Yeah, at least ask the question.
And ask the question. And when I was a commissioner, this was my benchmark. I would have lobbyists come in all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And we're sitting in my office. We might be alone. I might have an assistant with me. But I'm sitting there and listening. And they're telling me why this is so important, this idea, this program. And I'm sitting there. And while they're sitting there, I'm listening. But I always have the silent taxpayer next to me. So when they would leave,
yeah.
I would turn to the silent taxpayer and say, what do you think?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you do something that the taxpayers of this state agree with and it brings value to their homes, look what's going on right now with inflation. Look what's going on with the cost of living.
Oh, yeah.
The cost of homes. This does not need to be that way.
We discuss it every single week. I don't
Yeah.
think a week has gone by in the last year that we haven't discussed the cost of renting or owning a home.
But seeds of government encroachment are planted every day across the United States, including New Hampshire, with federal dollars from the Biden administration that seem to be free, but nothing is free.
Yep.
And I want to be there to make sure the right questions are asked to protect our freedoms and to continue the New Hampshire advantage.
All right. So does your campaign, do you have websites, contact?
Yes.
Let's talk about how folks can get a hold of you.
Thank you, because we can get excited talking about this issue. We've just started. We have a website, johnstephennh.com, johnstephennh.com, and we have a campaign team. We started meeting with lots of folks, and we're going to be out in every single community in this district.
Okay.
And I have a phone number, a cell phone number. Happy to give it out publicly here. Anybody can call me at any time. 603-419-9592. 603-419-9592. And the other thing I would say, I want to add one more area that is very important in state government, and it's about the importance of the council. And it's about constituent service. It's about making sure that the departments, again, it all comes down to accountability, but counselors receive calls from the citizens of this state that are impacted by regulation, licensing, or other actions of government, and know that your counselor can be there and be a force that could help you, that could listen and could hear. And I'm going to give a couple examples. So I was driving by this restaurant in the Lakes region that it seemed like it was open, and my wife and I were trying, let's go try this new restaurant. We went in, we saw the woman, and I felt like, wow, I want to check out this new restaurant. And went in, and she was sweeping up and everything. I said, are you open? She said, no, we've been waiting 3 weeks for the food inspector to come here and give us the green light. 3 weeks during the summer season.
Jeez.
Okay? The food inspectors work for HHS. Okay?
Right.
So some bureaucrat that comes in, and I don't mean to demean them when I say bureaucrat, but someone working in the bureaucracy comes in, 8:30, leaves at 4, and this woman is trying to open up a restaurant for her family and bring in revenue for the community as well.
Sure.
I got on the phone from my prior, knowledge of folks at the department. I called them myself. Can you get someone out here to help this woman? Just to review it and do the inspection. They were there the next day. But the council makes those calls. Because I know I've been in that situation where a governor council had called me. Counselors can help. I also, on the campaign trail here in Manchester, I spoke to a gentleman that owns a child care facility. He wanted to open up a new wing for infants. Again, to hire more people, to bring more revenue, had great quality, great rating, was waiting weeks.
Well, never mind all the families,
And the families.
I've got 8 grandchildren, and getting them into
But he could
a
not,
daycare facility, and he's now expanding and giving that opportunity to new families, and he couldn't.
He couldn't until The Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services license inspector came down and gave him the green light. Well, what do you do in that situation? You call your governor council. I want to be that governor council that's also there to listen to folks and help people in businesses get through the logjam of licensing and regulation and sometimes the government encroachment that affects their lives. I don't like that. And I just want people to work for the taxpayer. And the last thing I would say when I was commissioner, I said to all of my staff, 3,000 at the Department of Health and Human Services, I wrote them a message. I said, remember one thing, the money you take home, your check that you get, is paid for by the taxpayers.
Nice.
Don't ever forget that.
Nice.
That's great. One of the things I liked, and I know we're running short of time, but
that's
one of the things I liked that the executive councilors did is they moved around to different towns and held their meetings at different towns. And I thought that was a great idea. I had attended a couple of those, and you could get, like you said, you get your constituents there, and they see that you're working for them. And that was a great thing.
Great idea.
Yeah.
And you get to see, and I know Joe Kinney, Councilor Kinney was telling us today about the North Country, and we are going to go up to the border, and we're going to look at what's going on there. Because you may not think that the council is involved with border issues. Yes, it is. There are contracts, there are issues that the council is going to be involved in, and we need to protect our borders.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, I hope we can get you back on again before you
I'd love that.
finish this campaign. But thanks for being here. And I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to talk to you.
I just appreciate this opportunity you've given me to talk to the voters, and I'm going to be talking to them all summer and into September. And I'd ask you again one more time, anyone out there watching, and I'd ask for your vote at the for the executive council race in September and in November, if we're that fortunate. And I want to be able to represent the people of the state. Thank you. God bless.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. All right, we'll see you next week.